All right, I think folks are entering the room. Good to see everybody. Oh, awesome. We've got a lot of folks entering. Um, Awesome. It's great to see y'all. Some really familiar names. Here we go. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Mitchell. Trent. Okay, awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to do today, and this is a very important topic. My name is Jess Wilkinson. I've met many of you, but I don't think I've met all of you, which is also really exciting. So just to note that, this webinar has reached folks that maybe we haven't met or spoken to. Um, very frequently as the community of practice, but I'm an economic development researcher. I'm at RTI International. I lead with our team. Avery's on the line, Marissa's on the line, Olivia's on the line, and we lead the communities of practice for the Building Better Regions community of practice, as well as the Recompete community of practice. We're excited to have both groups on the line today. We don't always get to do that, but when we have topics that are relevant to both communities, we just always are excited to give people an opportunity to cross-pollinate and meet each other. And so I'm really happy to have y'all here today. I will be quick and introduce Jen Simon and then pass it off to her to get us started with the conversation today about demystifying philanthropy. This is a conversation that has come up many times through our work with both Building Better Regions and Recompete communities. And so we listen to y'all that this is a top priority and excited to have this conversation. So I will introduce Jen. Here's her picture. She's on the line. Jen Simon founded Catalyst after nearly 3 decades working across the full grant life cycle, from program design and proposal development to review, compliance, and performance management. She was previously at the Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC, where she managed 280 grants totaling millions of dollars and supported communities through pre-application guidance, application review, post-award compliance, closeout, grantee relationship management, and through Catalyst project and funding solutions. Now she works with coalitions and communities across the country, assembling teams of experts to support organizations doing important work. And through Catalyst, they support nonprofits and universities, state and local governments, grant makers on funding strategies, proposal reviews, braiding funding, and as we're going to talk about today, philanthropy strategies. So I will kick it off or pass it off to Jen.
Thank you. We are so excited to be here. I am introducing one of my long-term friends and colleagues who is based in Washington, D.C., Eric Stockton with Stockton Rural Health Partners. He is on board with me as we do this work. You can take a lot of what was just said and hit ditto because Eric and I have had very similar paths throughout the years. He, however, has had 23 years in federal grant making and has helped thousands of projects through that process. He offers strategic guidance to nonprofits and local governments and through project development and funding strategies. He has experience in health-related philanthropy, and I think it's health-related, substance use disorder, rural health, workforce development, all of those things intertwine, as you all know, and he is highly active in those spaces with grantees and coalitions as well. He's served as program staff for a private foundation and a nationwide philanthropic partnership around healthcare. So, though, am going to go ahead and walk us very quickly through this agenda. Welcome and introductions. We're in that already. You're going to hear from our peer presenter here in a second, a philanthropy panel. We'll give time for questions and answers, and then we'll have a brief closing where we'll share a philanthropy conversation guide. So, session housekeeping before we dive in. You will receive a follow-up email with the slides, the recording, a survey, and the conversation tool. So you will have that. Sorry, Eric, I didn't bring up the dog. He's usually in the background helping. So if you could please mute your mic to minimize any background noise, and feel free to put your questions in the chat throughout. We love engagement. We'd also, if you're interested and feel comfortable in doing so, introduce yourselves in the chat, who you are, who you're with, maybe your coalition if you're putting, your organization name. We'll have a poll question and some other questions potentially to get conversation going toward the end. Please keep pitching to a minimum. Obviously, we want you to be able to engage with our panelists and ask questions, but we're going to call this a no pitching zone. So this is a question for us to find out from you. What is your biggest challenge in pursuing philanthropic funding? So we've put some answers here. A, we don't know which foundations to approach. B, not enough bandwidth to follow through, to find the foundations, to follow through writing applications, whatever that might be. Difficulty getting meetings with foundation staff members. We haven't tried yet, is D. This webinar may be your wake-up call. And E, list any other challenge that you have and you want to share with the group. So I'll give you about 30 seconds here just to share your thoughts from this poll. So we have an A and a C and a B, an A and C again. A. So great. So thank you for participating. So A and C seems to be pretty big. I know when I work with clients, B is usually in there. I did see a couple of folks that put B. So knowing which foundations to approach, having the bandwidth to follow through, getting those meetings with foundation staff members. So these are things that we'll address through our conversations with the presenter and the panelists. So I am going to move us forward here and introduce a new friend, Marshall OGA. And Marshall's Director of Economic Development and Workforce Systems at Seeding Success. He helped he helps lead the implementation of More for Memphis, a 5-year, $1.4 billion community investment strategy. He has supported the Prosper Memphis Recompete Coalition, which, as you all know, likely selected as a top 22 finalist among 500 applicants. He's helped develop initiatives connecting Memphis residents to education, training, supportive services, quality jobs. And Marshall is also, is a very interesting designation, a 2026 Rockefeller Foundation U.S. Big Bets Fellow, which is also in and of itself somewhat of a philanthropic strategy. So I am going to turn it over to Marshall. Marshall, you just tell me when you need me to move the slides along.
Sounds good. Can y'all hear me? All right. Yeah. Um, Thank you for the introduction. I'm honored to be able to speak. It's always interesting doing these because I feel like a lot of times I'm talking to folks that have been doing a lot of the same things that I've been doing. So I'm glad to give some insights into what we're doing in Memphis, but know that I understand y'all are doing this work and probably many of you have been doing it longer than I have. So hopefully I say something that is helpful. So just some context in Memphis. We, like Jen had mentioned, were a recompete finalist. We were not selected, which I think kind of leads to like why this is helpful, because if we don't have the millions of dollars from a recompete fund, then what are the other sources of funding that we need to fund what we're doing? I work for a nonprofit in Memphis called Seeding Success. We're a cradle to career backbone organization. So I think some of the stuff that comes up is helpful just for the context. Like my job is to connect everybody in the community. I don't have to worry about doing direct service work and implementation work. We're more doing the evaluation work. We're connecting nonprofits, local government, philanthropy and bringing in resources and doing data analysis, things like that. So that I think context is important because I don't think everybody has the luxury of like their full-time job being that backbone entity to do the work. Um, so some of the stuff that I say might not be directly applicable to what you're doing, but maybe it will because the recompete work was kind of backbone work. Um, that being said, so the work that I'm leading has worked in Memphis because I think really at the end of the day, because we have a shared community strategy. So Jen mentioned the More for Memphis $1.4 billion economic mobility plan that we have. We also have the chambers. So we work very closely with the Memphis Chamber, that Prosper 2030 plan. And together, those two plans kind of guide a lot of the work that we do. I will say I wish we had $1.4 billion just sitting there. Like we do not. That is the whole plan in its entirety, mixed up of private philanthropic funding as well as funding from the public sector. And it's an ideal state. So there's like 35 different strategies and focus areas in there with the goal of improving economic mobility. But really, we had the benefit of creating that plan through philanthropic dollars. So philanthropic, a national philanthropic funder funded us to come up with this plan, of which we worked with about 50 community partners over 2 years to develop this strategy, of these multiple strategies, and then we were able to bring that to philanthropic partners, and it's been very successful. We have a lot of local Memphis partners that fund it. We also have quite a few national funders that fund the work either through us or through our other direct service partners in Memphis. Um, but really, I think that one of the things that really has worked as a part of that is that both locally and nationally, folks see that we have a strong coalition of folks that are working together. Um, so, like I said, we had like 50 partners that were a part of that planning process. Currently, we have about $3 million in philanthropic funding that is going to about 20 of those partners to implement direct service work and policy change work. So that's just been a really great indicator, I think, to national philanthropic funders, especially of the coalition that exists, and it gives them like a sense of security of like, oh, these folks are already working together. They put together this plan. Like, we're willing to invest in this because it's been de-risked a little bit. Um, and then I think the other part is that this wasn't just like a, hey, seeding success. Here's a few $1 million to come up with a plan. There were relationships that were built over many years. I can't take credit for many of those, but folks in our organization started off with much smaller grant funding requests, whether that was just to do like continuous improvement in schools, to do like workforce development projects, to do like coalition building, and really built up relationships with funders. So I think some of those is like through many years talking with funders, understanding what they're funding, them understanding the work we're doing led to stronger and stronger trust between us and the funders to get to where we are today, to these like larger funding opportunities. And then this last one, what has worked is like being really clear on like what we want folks to fund. I think we've gone to like a few funders and they're like, well, like, what do you want us to do? And I think it is dependent on the funder. Like some funders want to have like a lot more um, input on like what you're doing, and some of them like want you to do what you're doing. And I think sometimes you just kind of got to gauge that. But offering like a really clear, specific role for them, like we need you to fund this because it's going to lead to this sustained funding or this braided funding or this recompete grant that is happening, and you can tie it into this so we can build it out. So I think just being really clear on that. You can go to the next slide. So what has not worked, and I feel like sometimes it's just like a hit or miss, but like leading with the funding, like if there's a funder you've never met, and you go to a conference or like somebody in your local community, and we're just asking for money, like we need $1 million. They're probably gonna be like, that's nice. It doesn't really pan out that well. I think where we've seen the traction is like really when we're presenting our work or letting people better understanding work, and then they're coming to us and asking to fund that work. Or really in like an ideal sense, another one of our partners or national funders is connecting us with another funder saying like, we're funding this work, you should fund this work. So like just leading with an ask, not really helping. Chasing opportunities that don't fit. Like we're a backbone organization, and our organizations might be doing direct service, they might do something else. I think a lot of times there's like a, a need, like money. I just tell a lot of our partners recently, like nobody's complaining when the money is flowing. When it's not, then that's really like when the issues come in. But then people start this like mission creep, looking for things like we don't do tutoring, but there's a tutoring grant. Like maybe we should fly a tutoring grant, and then we end up failing epically because we don't do tutoring. Like we do backbone work. So I think that's like another area that gets tempting when like times are tight, but like trying to stick to your goal when you can. Overcomplicating the story, I think this one is like a huge one, the most like important. Like if you can tell the story of what's going on in your area, like that's really like the selling point for a lot of the funders that we deal with. And I will say that like I personally believe like our story is very complicated. Like trying to explain what a backbone organization does to people that don't know what a backbone organization does, they're like, well, what are you even doing? So like trying to tell that story of how we're connecting folks, bringing like data informed decision making, bringing policy into the sense and like advocating for new policies, has been like definitely a learning journey and definitely sometimes a hit or miss. Like people sometimes don't get what you're doing. So like really honing in on what that story is important. And then the last one, not waiting until funding is urgently needed. I don't know if there's like anything you can do about this, but we try to be proactive and strategic about when funding is going to happen. Like we try to at least like look into the next year of like what funding cycles we think are going to be open and like what opportunities exist. Because at the end of the day, and this I will say from a public funding source, I think probably a lot of y'all had to deal with it. Like a lot of the funding cycles have been like shrunken to like a month this last year. So that's been like a challenge. So just like ready to go. Um, what founders have responded to, like I said, strong partnerships. We're really one of our biggest like value adds to the work with partners is just having these really clear outcomes on what the work is doing. So our direct service partners, some of them are writing things on paper, some of them have like more sophisticated like data tracking systems. But if we don't have information on the outcomes, like why this is effective, like the funders aren't gonna fund it. Um, Community credibility is huge. I'm sure that folks have dealt with like local political drama in any work that you do, and I think that that's a given. But like really building those community relationships where they matter is critical. Like there are funders that are going to come to town and they're going to come ask around and be like, oh, what do you think about Seeding Success? Or what do you think about Code Crew or whatever the local organization is, to check before they're funding. So community credibility, I think, is important. And then in addition to that, like credibility with community members, not just like nonprofits. Like, are you engaging the community? Do you have, like, we have community-based governance for our not for our More from Memphis work. So there's community members on our governance board that are informing that. Um, and then the last one, and this one I think is hard sometimes, is just a defined gap that their funding can address. So like I mentioned before, like what if they can bring $500,000 to the table? Like how is that going to address a gap to get to larger outcomes? I can give like a specific example just real quick. I know there's only a short amount of time, but we're working on like skills trades work and already coming into the system. We owe dollars, like $16 million a year, but there's nothing to tie those specific employers and training partners to those dollars. So if we receive philanthropic funding for a pathway fund, which gives us flexible dollars that we can then get those organizations to work more closely with the WIOA funds, and the results to bigger, better outcomes. And then I'll just run through this real quick. Questions we still have. How can funding, and hope maybe some of the funders on the call can answer this, but how can funding decisions better match the pace of implementation? Sometimes what we're doing doesn't match when the funder cycles are. They're like, we're giving out this award in October. It's like, well, we need funding in August because that's when school starts, et cetera. how do we protect community priorities? Sometimes the community's priorities are not the same as philanthropic priorities. Like, how do we deal with that? Who funds coalition infrastructure? Like I mentioned, like who's funding the backbones, and what is the case for that? And then how do we sustain work after the grant ends? That's always a question that we're dealing with, and a lot of times there's a question at the end of most grant applications: how is this going to be sustainable? Like we're going to look for more grants. That's how it's going to be sustainable. Uh, but tying in public funding and things like that. So yeah, Memphis takeaways: strategy first, relationships matter. Be specific about the gap, and don't treat the panel as a pitch opportunity. Cool. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. I'm going to throw it back over to Eric.
Thank you, Marshall. That's great intel from somebody who's had good experience, good luck before recompete, I think, in tapping into philanthropic resources. And I hope that's helpful to hear from a peer for the other coalition folks that are out there. Um, and you brought up a couple of points that I'd already sort of flagged to talk about with our panelists. So let me introduce them to you all, and then we'll talk about a few questions, and maybe Marshall, you might have a way to chime in on some of these points too. So first, let me introduce Heidi Binko. Heidi is the co-founder and chief executive officer of the Just Transition Fund, which is a philanthropy focused on workforce development, entrepreneurship, and place-based infrastructure in mining and power plant communities in coal-affected areas of the United States. Under her leadership, Just Transition has pioneered a national model for the implementation of federal funds by helping coal-affected communities overcome barriers to successfully accessing federal investment. And her commitment to this model has been instrumental in leveraging $2.6 billion in public funding to support projects that create tangible economic impacts in 31 states. Prior to JTF, she was with the Rockefeller Family Fund, and before that, the West Wind Foundation. And then we also have Justin Maxson, who is a new Chief Program Officer for the Heinz Endowments based in Pittsburgh, one of the largest philanthropies in the country. Um, Before Heinz, he's had a lot of great experience, including at Build US, which was a national funder that supports technical assistance and organizing for communities that are pursuing federal funds. At the Amalgamated Foundation with a program, a resource rural program focused on clean energy and infrastructure in rural. Served as Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at USDA. Was previously the leader of another influential regional funder, the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation in North Carolina. And even before all that, was a grantee while leading the Mountain Association in Eastern Kentucky and the Progressive Technology Project here in DC. So thank you all for being with us. And I think you guys will have a large ton of information to share. And even though you have lots to share, let's say, I think we have to admit that we can't just demystify everything there is about philanthropy in the next, I think we have 24 minutes to talk with you two philanthropy experts. So we'll just do our best. I started out thinking of asking sort of a really broad question, but I don't know if it's too useful, but I'll just say, is it even possible to answer the question, what are foundations looking for in a multiplayer, multi-sector coalition? Um, I think we've got some clues about what's been working in a place like Memphis, but maybe you could say, just like, if you had to give a quick answer, what are you looking for if a coalition comes to you?
After you,
Heidi, you
Heidi.
can go first.
Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks, Justin. And Justin, you have to remember, like, we're not old. We're just really wise because we've been doing this a while.
I feel old.
And fun fact for you all who didn't know, Justin, when he was actually at the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, 11 years ago, helped us get started the Just Transition Fund. And then when Justin ran Mountain Association, when he was running it, calling it, when it was Maysaid, he was a grantee of mine. So it's kind of funny how life is, yeah, how there's been a circle. So Eric, Jen, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me today. I just want to say a little bit and then I'll get to your questions. I am with the Just Transition Fund. Eric read my biography. I'd been with the Rockefeller for Family Fund for 10 years. And then before that, started out my career with the West Wind Foundation. So I have 24 years of philanthropic experience that I often joke I don't know what I'm going to do with because I know a lot of this crazy stuff that is like very specific. So I really encourage you all, like, if there's anything that you want to talk to me or my team about, please reach out because we're really knee deep in this economic diversification and we have lots of experience among us all on philanthropy. I also wanted to say before I answered your question, Eric, that the Just Transition Fund is a little bit different than like the Heinz Endowments or Rockefeller Foundation or some others, and that we are not endowed. So we raise everything that we give out. And actually, the Rockefeller Family Fund was also structured as a hybrid. And I raise this just to tell you all that I think, just to mention this to you all, that we are actually in a position at the JTF where we are also raising funds from very, very, very large donors, and we're grant making. And so I'm kind of with you because I think this is really, really hard to do. And I've been on both sides of the transaction and still am. And so I think that the experience and maybe the advice we have really comes from us feeling the frustration that a lot of you feel every day with donors, right? And so I just wanted to put that caveat out there. Um, just really quickly, Eric, I do think your question is actually really excellent, and I'll be very, very brief. Because Marshall, I thought you did an amazing, amazing job. And there's probably no need for Justin and I even to speak, but since Eric asked the question, I'll answer. I would actually say three things for at least what I'm and what we're looking for in a big multiplayer, multi-sector coalition from the JTF's perspective. One I would say is a really big idea. I mean, a lot of you are working in communities that have been working from a place of scarcity for a long time, and I know how difficult it is to take a step back, particularly like during the last Biden administration when there was a lot of funds. But when you step back and dream and really think big, that's how you're going to get foundations excited, right? Paul and Erica are on the line, and when I first saw their vision for their recompete idea, like maybe 3 years ago now, I was really, really excited by the future that they wanted to build. So I would say number one, have a big idea. A little bit of a refinement on that, Marshall, picking up on something that you said, which I thought was really, really excellent, is be really clear about it and take it up to a high level, right? We work with a lot of probably a lot of you on this call, but we do a lot of work with the Act Now, Build Back Better coalition in West Virginia, and I love the work that they're doing and they've got this very, very big vision, but we always talk about how important it is for them to articulate that because a lot of times, and I get this, right? You all are really thinking about like the specific projects and you want to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. When you think about funders and you're talking to them, less is more, right? So really think about what's that big idea, what's that big vision, and to Marshall's point, be really, really clear about it. The second thing I would think about when you're approaching funders for coalition work is I would be very, very, very clear about additionality, what we call additionality at the JTF, and that is what can those specific, like what can the JTF dollars unlock? Right? I think that's what really gets donors really excited when they can start to see, even if they're one of maybe 10 funders, how are they sort of contributing in a way that they can go back and take the case to their board members that their dollars matter, right? Um, and then I would just say lastly, I would say really think, especially during this time, this is maybe a little bit less than what we look for, but maybe a little bit more unsolicited advice to you all. But I would say don't waste philanthropic dollars and really, really think critically about how you're going to stack them with federal or with private or with other funds, because you've got the opportunity with philanthropic dollars to take a lot of risk, right? To fund things that the federal government won't fund, right? So you don't want to you want to make sure you take advantage of that, right? So Eric, I don't know if that's helpful, but those were three quick points that I had in response to your very excellent question.
Great, thanks. Justin, what do you think?
I will double click on a bunch of what she said. I'll just add two things. I think one is who is at the table, and is there clear governance is important that a funder is able to see who's the backbone, how are decisions made, how do things actually happen, and that it's a broad, multi-sector representation of the right set of actors who need to have skin in the game. Uh, so I mean, we actually think about based on that big vision or the outcome you're aiming at, who needs to be at the table to have a credible attempt to achieve that outcome. So there's some link between the outcome you're aiming at and who is it that is at the table.
Yep, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean,
I,
who's in the mix? Who's not in the mix? What clues do you get about the success and the survivability of the coalition by, thinking about who's not at the table, or who's at the table but not really chipping in is another way to think of it, maybe a little bit. Um,
yeah.
so good, thank you. I was really, in my thinking about this in advance, I was thinking a lot about how how, intermediaries as a way to help bigger funders kind of get to the ground, especially the national funders. And like, I mean, and having worked with some national funders, like so often they're just very upfront, like they don't know what's going on in the local level, and they will say very upfront, like they don't really have much background. And I think intermediaries are obviously a pretty common tool, and that's been a path to success for Memphis, it seems like. I guess a question for you two both is like, I think you both have been investors in intermediaries. And do you think for you and maybe for other big funders, big philanthropies, that there's a willingness and an ability to invest in intermediaries as part of the package for communities?
I would say absolutely. I mean, I think they're critical. Particularly if you have a big goal and outcome, a good a funder is going to recognize they can't, or they will be less successful if they try to make direct grants and they don't understand the context, they don't understand the players. Having a strong intermediary that can help drive the right sort of partnerships and resources, understands the local context, I just think is key. I think that's also particularly true for capital, not just for grants. CDFIs and pooled funds in places that can distribute resources are often
Yep.
key. The other big thing I want to say that I think y'all all probably know, but it's important not to forget, is just foundations are snowflakes. They're all a little different. And there's some effort it really takes to try to understand who the program staff are, what do they care about, are there particular ideas that are important to them? And it's frustrating as hell, right? I've been a
Mhm.
fundraiser a lot longer than I've been a grant maker, and there is just some of this need to really understand the particular things that a funder cares about. But I think in this space in particular, intermediaries are key, and more foundations understand that they're critical to getting hard and complicated things done.
Mhm. Mhm. I would completely agree with Justin on the fact of intermediaries. And, we always say this in philanthropy and it's overused, so I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to mention it now. But, if you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation, right? And, Justin's exactly right. Just veering off from your question a little bit, Eric, because I thought Justin answered it really well, and I don't know that I have anything else to add, but it's so difficult to develop those relationships. And I know, Marshall, you raised this as a question. Jen, you guys had listed this in the beginning, and as one of the sort of the answers that you posed to the audience members. Justin alluded to it, and I think that's where, for the foundations that you're working with now, especially the ones that you have really good relationships with, ask them. Say, hey, your relationship, your work with us has been, your support of us has been really helpful. In your circle of funders, who are the two or three people that you think you could introduce me to, that you think I should get to know? absolutely do that, right? Because you can spend a lot of time submitting LOIs, and you can have the best LOI, you can have the best idea, but you just have to realize that foundations really get inundated. If they know from Justin that, wow, you're really doing good work, it's going to be really a game changer. So I know that wasn't exactly the question you asked Eric here, but it's come up a couple times, and I just think that's very good, like pragmatic advice.
Yep. Yeah, right on. Um, uh, Maybe a big part of what brings this group together today on this call is their interest in sustainability, um, either sustaining a big initiative that's underway or trying to move forward with a model that they can predict is going to be more sustainable. And it was Marshall's last question of the questions still hanging out there for their work in Memphis. Um, I think I just I know lots of folks are thinking about sort of social enterprise and PRIs and reimbursement models as part of the mix of sustainability. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about sort of the stomach for funders in getting involved in that kind of work, and how can folks like these coalitions kind of make their way into those spaces? It seems like intermediaries are part of the picture for that braided funding, right?
Hmm? Justin, you want me to go? I
Sure.
can start. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I would say that funders are definitely getting more comfortable with that approach. And I would actually say be as creative as possible. And yes to all of those other sources of funding and sort of dedicated revenue that you mentioned, Eric, and even go above and beyond that, right? Think about how you might tap the private sector. Think about how you might tap like state funds. Like we really work to diversify economies, right? At the end of the day, because a lot of the places that we work have been really dependent on one particular industry or one particular employer. And so, we always say, just like you want to diversify your financial portfolio as a nonprofit, right? To be as resilient as possible, it's just like a local government or local economy, right? Don't be too dependent on any one source, right? Federal government or philanthropy or anything. I mean, look at the last couple of years. I think this has really shown us, right? Like what can happen if there's too much dependence on any one sector. So I would say all of the above. And for us at the JTF, we really encourage people. We encourage people to think about how companies can support them, because a lot of time there can be really really cool and innovative public-private partnerships, right? And there's a lot of good companies out there who are trying to do good. We help. Not only do we help groups get funding at the federal level through our Federal Access Center, but there's also a lot of pools of state funding out there, whether they are state matching funds like the state of Kentucky created a couple of years ago, or they're funds like this with the CEJA bill created in the state of Illinois, which is a $40 million workforce and economic development program that communities can tap. So look at all of those sources, right? I just think the more diverse your revenue base is, the better for longevity and resilience.
I think that's great. I will just add, to some degree, you got to match the tool with the cash flow. So for a social enterprise opportunity, there has to be demand, right? For a reimbursement model, there has to be a payer, a state agency, Medicaid, an employer in the workforce context. For a PRI, there needs to be genuine repayment capacity, and whatever the idea are. Like those are all models of slightly different types of philanthropic capital that are important and could be on the table if your context allows that a particular form of capital to operate. I do think there's an increasing number of foundations that are comfortable with beyond the grant investments, but it's not all of them. And again, I sort of go back to like, who's in your landscape? Where do you have relationships? What are your opportunities? And then can you figure out those players that will bring grant and different types of capital? There's a trend to these blended capital stacks where a particular foundation might put in a grant and a PRI or an MRI, these other types of capital. And it's really about, again, trying to build that relationship with a particular foundation that they have enough trust to come in these other ways.
And ask the
Yeah,
donors too, right? Like a lot of the donors that we work with, they do both, right? So, like MacArthur Foundation, just for an example, right? They are going to be giving grants on a lot of these issues, but they also have a really, really awesome impact investing program, right? And that was the case. I remember you guys did a wonderful job at Mary Reynolds Babcock. You did a lot of that work. So, yeah, ask when you start to develop relationships with those program officers.
yeah, interesting. I guess you just have to think about even if you had identified a foundation and you have more or less relationship with them and they say, yeah, we could be interested in a PRI sometime or helping with social enterprise. But just because they're interested doesn't mean they even necessarily know how to do it themselves
Mhm.
or have a lot of comfort with it in general. And it might maybe it takes some investment of time and energy to sort of like get there with them. If you have an idea that you think could be funded that way and they're not ready, it's part of your long-term relationship with that funder. It's not like an instant ask, like just fill out this form and we'll give you a social enterprise bond or something.
Yeah, no, no, often, at least in my experience, they're sometimes actually harder to get because you've got to prove repayment, right?
Right.
It's not like a grant where they don't expect it back, right? So
Yep.
this is where you have to match the use with the source of the capital.
Yep. Well, I think if um, Jess and Jen don't mind, I think there is a lot of interest in, I mean, several things you've mentioned are sort of come back to ideas about braided funding and sort of thinking about the mix of funding. And we know there's a lot of interest in that topic. And I think it's safe to say like we're going to try to have an additional session like this on this topic if resources come available to RTI. So just sort of helping point out, I think there's a lot of interest in those ideas that this group would like to know more about. Um, we know another specific question, I think it's been mentioned a couple times already in this call, is like, what are we supposed to do about the misaligned deadlines between foundations and feds? I mean, it's for all my years as a federal funder, it was a headache, but even harder these days to understand what's coming from the feds and when, and also how fast can you respond. I just wonder what your thoughts are about like, how are we going to deal with this? I mean, if we're saying we have to be strategic and plan ahead and think about the matrix of the funders, and you have like a big empty space on your matrix of like, when could this federal partner come back to the table? Who knows?
I
I
think you
think,
have, oh, go ahead, Justin. Oh, go
no,
ahead.
no, please, Heidi.
You sure? Okay. I think you have to be ready. I think that uh, yeah, it's just the speed of and the unpredictable nature of the way that like, like work the other a couple weeks ago or whatever, things are getting like workforce programs are getting announced is just it's happening really fast. And so it's sort of specific funds it's going to fill a niche, right? So I would say if you're with an organization or you're, with a coalition or whatnot that's really dependent on those funds and you're going to want to go after that, make sure you know that and talk to some of us. Like, at the Just Transition Fund, you all had asked us what resources we have available. We've got our Federal Access Center, which we had really, really ramped up during the Biden administration because of the amount of federal funds available. And we still have those resources available, usually to our current grantees and close partners. But we could change that if we hear of more and more demand, right? So for those of you that are here, since it's a no pitch zone, don't tell me now, but reach out to me or Audrey Josephson Day, who's on the call with us, because we do want to hear like how we can help. And for us at the FAC, we know how hard it is to respond to that. And so a lot of times we'll get comments from people or from our grantees saying, hey, we know we want to go after the next round of work or we owe or whatnot. But we don't know when it's going to come. And that's a time when like, we really take advantage of our relationships at USDA, at ARC, at other places to help give communities as much advance notice as possible. And we are super, super flexible with our funding, right? To be able to give groups a shot and a chance. And I think, we turned things around like within a 3-week period, a couple of years ago. And I think it needs to move even faster now. And we've done that for some of our grantees, right? So I'd say
Great.
just make sure you know it's coming, or make sure you know if you want to go after it. And then we and others can help you get there.
Awesome.
I would just add that foundations love leverage. They love to be able to say our dollars helped unlock these resources. So if you have a specific a timing gap or mismatch, that a pool of resources will help, will overcome and bridge you to those other resources. It's an easier ask for a foundation to step into. And while generally foundations are not as flexible as they should be, sometimes they're really flexible with the right reasons. And this is an example that a funder should step up into if it helps free up federal resources.
Yeah, good. Maybe thank you, Heidi, for pointing out the Federal Access Center. And I just maybe generally ask Justin or Heidi, do you have any other resources that come to mind that you would like to be able to offer these folks? And then we'll turn to Q&A.
Yeah, yeah. So we have our local economy lab, and I think as many of you know, the local economy lab, we have 3 different elements of our work. So we issue 3 different RFPs, one focused on workforce, one focused on entrepreneurship, and one that's open right now, which is focused on place-based infrastructure investment. We may run those again. I don't know, right? So I would say keep your eye on that. That is in addition to the Federal Access Center that I talked about, but also sort of coming down the road for those of you that are working on coalitions and you're particularly thinking about state policy. We're going to have a policy round later this year, so there will be more opportunities there. And then one final thing, again, Audrey is on the line with us today. She's running our new expanded transition exchange program, and that's going to include a lot of direct technical assistance for communities working on economic development, peer learning, access to our both national and regional convenings. And we've been really thinking about how we can continue to add more and more resources there. So we really would love to hear from you. If you've got a need in the field that's, above and beyond the grant, because we recognize those, then talk to Audrey, because there's more programming to be built out this year within that program as well.
I dropped
Cool.
a few in the chat here. They aren't terribly novel. I will say that the Candide Foundation is a directory. I'm always surprised what I learn if I spend some time in it. It's a great way to see foundations in a particular place. I also think I dropped a link to an article in here, or at least the name of the article. That's just a piece on outcomes and how to talk about outcomes in a way that I often think is compelling to foundations. And then if you are in the PRI, MRI space, the Mission Investors Exchange has a ton of great resources on it.
Great. Thank you, Heidi and Justin, so much for being with us. I'm going to turn it over to Jen to run some Q&A. So questions can go to anybody as far as I'm concerned, but Jen's running this section now. Thank you so much.